Welcome back. We are so glad you're joining us today for a custom deep dive.
It's great to be here. We have a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. So the source material sitting in front of us is a massive, incredibly detailed encyclopedic overview of naval warfare in World War I.
Which I know might sound a bit dry at first glance.
Right, exactly. If your previous experience with this topic involves those dry textbook recitations of ship tonnages and dates.
And just endless lists of admirals.
Yes, endless lists. We're going to pivot hard from that today. Our mission is to cut straight through that raw data to uncover the actual story here.
Because the real story is fascinating.
It is wild. We are diving into a massive global technological arms race. It's the literal dawn of modern naval combat.
And the deeply counterintuitive ways this conflict rewired the modern world.
Exactly. So why should you, the listener, care about century-old battleships?
Well, it is an era defined by an unprecedented, almost violent shift in technology. Reading through these sources, you quickly realize this isn't just a niche history lesson.
Not at all.
It operates as a masterclass in how rapid technological advancements and the inherent critical vulnerabilities of global supply chains dictate world power.
Which feels incredibly relevant right now.
Oh, absolutely. Whether your focus is on modern geopolitics, the tech sector, or global trade routes, the foundational themes are all present here, playing out on a global stage over a century ago.
I've been poring over these notes, and there are some genuine surprises coming up. I mean, we are looking at an obscure strategy book from 1887 that somehow managed to trigger a worldwide arms race.
A literal global panic.
Right. And a completely random fog bank accident that permanently altered the course of naval intelligence. Plus, we've got to look at British civilian diets during a massive submarine blockade that just defies all basic logic.
It really does.
Okay, let's unpack this.
The entire arms race, the catalyst for the steel beasts we associate with this era, actually traces back to an intellectual argument.
It does. It starts with an American naval officer. His name was Alfred Thayer Mahan.
Right, back in 1887.
Yeah, 1887. He publishes a book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, and his central thesis was totally uncompromising. He argued that maritime dominance is the single absolute key to global preeminence.
And he didn't just theorize about it either.
No, he looked at historical precedents. He pointed to Rome and Britain as these ultimate examples of powers that expanded and thrived specifically because of their naval supremacy.
Right, they controlled the waters, they controlled the world.
Exactly. And on the flip side, he argued that massive land powers like Hannibal's Carthage or Napoleonic France were just doomed to fail.
Because they lacked a dominant fleet to secure their economy.
You got it. He laid out a very clear blueprint. He basically said, if you want sustained economic growth and imperial influence, you absolutely must adopt the British model of concentrated sea power.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Mahan's book bypassed academic circles and landed directly on the desk of Wilhelm II in Germany.
The Kaiser himself.
Yes, and Wilhelm was already nursing this deep-seated envy of the Royal Navy.
Heavily influenced by his visits to his grandmother, right? Queen Victoria.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he and his naval secretary, Admiral Alfred Tirpitz, they internalized Mahan's thesis completely. They basically concluded that relying on British goodwill for their overseas trade routes and colonies was a strategic dead end.
They needed a massive fleet of their own.
Right. The goal wasn't just to be a dominant land power in Europe anymore. They intended to actively challenge the preeminent sea power on the globe.
So the British Admiralty obviously sees this buildup happening across the North Sea, and they completely understand that their national survival is entirely dependent on ruling those waves.
It's an existential threat.
Totally. So we see the rise of Jackie Fisher. He was the commander-in-chief of the British Mediterranean Fleet, and he eventually takes over as First Sea Lord.
A very intense guy.
Very intense. Fisher viewed the global map through a very specific operational lens. He identified what he called the 5 strategic keys to the empire and world economic system.
And those were geographic bottlenecks.
Exactly. We are talking about Gibraltar, Alexandria and the Suez, Singapore, the Cape of Good Hope, and the Straits of Dover. His singular mandate was to keep an absolute stranglehold on all 5 of those locations.
Achieving that mandate, though, required a ruthless reorganization of the Royal Navy.
I mean, ruthless is the word.
Fisher recognized that scattering outdated, slower ships across the globe just to show the flag was a luxury they could no longer afford.
Not against a modernized, concentrated German threat.
Exactly. So he initiated this radical culling process. He scrapped dozens of obsolete warships, just tossed them.
Which freed up cash and manpower.
Right. He then redirected every ounce of those saved resources into new, highly advanced designs. This meant investing heavily in submarines, destroyers, light cruisers, and most notably, the revolutionary battleship, the HMS Dreadnought.
Okay, let's pause on the Dreadnought for a second because this seems like a massive strategic paradox.
It really is.
Fisher builds this ship. It's an all-big-gun battleship, and it is such a monumental leap forward in speed and firepower that it essentially resets the global naval scoreboard down to zero.
Made every existing battleship on Earth obsolete overnight.
Right. But by creating a ship that made all others obsolete, didn't Fisher effectively wipe out Britain's own massive numerical advantage? Wasn't that an incredibly dangerous gamble?
It was an astronomical gamble. He essentially rendered his own massive fleet of pre-dreadnoughts totally useless just to ensure Britain possessed the first ship of the new era.
Wow.
He banked entirely on British industrial capacity. He declared they would have 10 dreadnoughts at sea before any competing nation even launched their first.
But rather than securing dominance quietly, this move triggered an intense psychological and economic escalation across Europe.
Oh, massive escalation.
Which brings us back to Admiral Tirpitz in Germany. He watches the Dreadnought launch, knowing it just turned his own meticulously funded fleet of 15 battleships into floating scrap metal.
That had to hurt.
Oh, I'm sure. But instead of folding, he leans into political theatrics. He uses the threat of his own resignation to strong-arm the German Reichstag into funding 3 new dreadnoughts and a battlecruiser.
Because he firmly believed German industrial might could eventually match and surpass British shipyards.
And that political maneuvering sent shockwaves through the British public. The financial strain of maintaining this new standard was staggering.
It created a literal public panic.
Yes, a total panic. By the spring of 1909, the British public is demanding more ships. It reminds me of modern-day panic buying, just on a geopolitical scale.
That's a great way to put it.
The government originally budgeted to build 4 dreadnoughts that year, and Winston Churchill actually summarized the sheer absurdity of the political resolution perfectly.
I love this quote.
It's so good. He wrote, "The Admiralty had demanded 6 ships, the economists offered 4, and we finally compromised on 8.
Which makes absolutely zero mathematical sense.
None. The momentum of the arms race was completely out of control. It became so incredibly expensive that Britain had to abandon its traditional 2-power standard.
Right, the policy of maintaining a fleet as large as the next 2 navies combined.
Yeah, they had to drop that and adopt a much narrower policy of simply maintaining a 60% margin over Germany. The naval budget hit £50 million in 1914.
Which nearly caused Lloyd George to resign in protest.
But that massive financial hemorrhage bought an era of staggering technological transformation. The speed of innovation was relentless.
We are looking at the transition from antiquated 19th century naval warfare to the foundation of the modern technological world in the span of roughly a decade.
And the technological leap detailed in the sources is exactly why this era is vital for anyone analyzing how rapid innovation occurs under extreme pressure.
Absolutely.
One of the most fundamental shifts we see is the transition from coal to oil propulsion.
Moving to oil fundamentally rewrote naval architecture and tactics. From an engineering standpoint, oil contains roughly 40% more energy by volume compared to coal.
Which immediately extended the operational range of these ships.
Right. It also revolutionized internal layouts. You no longer needed massive, structurally compromising coal bunkers.
Or legions of men performing the exhausting manual labor of shoveling coal into furnaces during combat.
Exactly. But tactically, the greatest advantage was actually visual.
Oh, right. The smoke.
Coal-fired engines produced towering plumes of thick black smoke, meaning a fleet could be spotted from miles over the horizon before the ships themselves were even visible.
And oil burned significantly cleaner,
Drastically reducing that visual signature and making early detection much more difficult.
We also see the introduction of the steam turbine during this time, pushing ship speeds from a maximum of maybe 14 to 20 miles per hour up to 28 miles per hour.
Which is a huge jump on the open ocean.
But the real game changer was how these ships aimed their weapons. You introduced gyroscopes and centralized fire control.
What the British called the director system.
Right. Before 1900, hitting a moving target at 2,000 yards was considered a wildly successful shot. But once the dreadnoughts were equipped with these new centralized directors, they were accurately hitting targets at over 10,000 yards.
They were engaging targets that were barely visible over the curvature of the Earth.
Mind-boggling.
Calculation lead times, windage, and the speed of both vessels at those ranges completely changed the geometry of naval engagements.
Right, it became an exercise in advanced mathematics rather than direct line-of-sight broadsides.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The divergence in battlecruiser design.
Yes, the battlecruiser.
Naval planners looked at the Dreadnought and realized they needed a variant that could scout ahead or hunt down smaller ships. But the British and the Germans took two entirely different philosophical approaches to the engineering.
They really did.
The British prioritized speed over everything. They intentionally sacrificed heavy armor plating to achieve higher speeds. Their theory was that they would carry massive Dreadnought-class guns, allowing them to outrun anything heavily armored enough to threaten them and outgun anything fast enough to catch them.
The German Admiralty chose a much more resilient philosophy, though.
Right.
They opted for slightly smaller main armament, equipping their battle cruisers with 11 or 12-inch guns, compared to the British 13.5-inch guns.
So a little less firepower.
Right, but they did that so they could increase speed while still retaining very heavy armor. They required ships that could operate independently, absorb significant punishment, and still function.
And this specific difference in design philosophy, compounded by operational procedures, had devastating consequences.
It did. The sources are incredibly critical of the British propellant handling.
They used highly volatile cordite.
They did. To increase their rate of fire, British crews routinely bypassed basic safety protocols.
Unbelievable.
They would literally leave the anti-flash doors open between the gun turrets and the ammunition magazines below.
Just to load the guns faster.
Yes. So during the Battle of Jutland, when those lightly armored British battle cruisers took direct hits, the flash from the explosion traveled straight down the open hoists directly into the cordite magazines,
resulting in catastrophic, instantaneous explosions that just tore the ships apart.
Exactly. Thousands of men gone in seconds.
While the surface fleets were dealing with volatile cordite and massive gunnery ranges, a completely different geometric problem was evolving beneath the surface.
The submarines.
Right. Planners had originally feared swarms of fast, cheap surface torpedo boats, which is actually why they invented the torpedo boat destroyer.
But the submarine proved to be the ultimate asymmetric threat.
It could slip entirely undetected past a massive Dreadnought blockade.
And when you combine submarines with the evolution of defensive naval mines, such as the one that sank the multi-million-pound Dreadnought HMS Audacious in October 1914, suddenly these massive surface fortresses looked incredibly vulnerable. That vulnerability completely dictated the operational reality of the war.
How so?
Well, you had these two colossally expensive surface fleets, the British Grand Fleet and the German High Seas Fleet, and they just staring each other down across the North Sea.
But major cinematic fleet engagements were exceptionally rare.
Aside from Jutland, Doggerbank, and Heligoland Bight, the German fleet largely remained in heavily fortified harbors behind dense minefields.
They acted as a fleet in being.
Right. It's a strategic concept where simply existing tied down the entirety of the British Grand Fleet, while Britain maintained a distant, suffocating blockade.
The public on both sides was demanding these glorious, decisive Trafalgar-style battles, but the admirals knew the mathematical risk of losing their dreadnoughts was just too high.
It resulted in a massive North Sea stalemate.
What's fascinating here is that the decisive weapon of this naval war wasn't the 13.5-inch gun of a dreadnought.
No, it wasn't.
It was the spreadsheet. It was starvation.
The true victory in the naval theater was won through an agonizingly slow, grinding British blockade that systemically severed the flow of food, raw materials, and fertilizers to Germany.
It was devoid of explosive glory.
Completely. It was pure economic strangulation that steadily starved German industry and its civilian population, eventually forcing the collapse that led to the armistice.
Germany obviously recognized this strangulation and deployed their ultimate countermeasure, the U-boat.
Right.
Initially, they operated under what were called cruiser rules. This meant a submarine had to surface, visually identify a target, use its deck guns, and allow the civilian crew time to evacuate into lifeboats before sinking the vessel.
Which is somewhat civilized, all things considered.
But as the British blockade tightened and armed merchant ships made surfacing totally suicidal, Germany escalated to unrestricted submarine warfare.
They began torpedoing merchant and passenger ships without any warning whatsoever.
The sinking of the Lusitania is the most famous example. And this ruthless, unrestricted campaign is what ultimately forced the United States out of neutrality and into the war.
The U-boats were devastating. They sank hundreds of Allied vessels with the explicit goal of starving Britain into submission in the exact same way Britain was starving Germany.
And here is the profound statistical irony from the source material regarding that specific U-boat campaign.
This part is wild.
Despite the sheer terror it inspired, and despite the staggering tonnage of merchant shipping sent to the bottom of the Atlantic, the U-boat campaign completely failed to break the British economy.
In stark contrast to the devastating effects of the blockade on Germany, British civilian nutrition actually improved during the war.
Wait, I need to stop you there. How does that math possibly work?
It sounds impossible.
You have an island nation, completely surrounded by hostile submarines sinking their supply ships daily, and their meat consumption actually rises. That defies all basic logic.
It really highlights the incredible resilience of a logistics network when a government is forced to adapt rapidly.
Okay.
The Allies didn't defeat the U-boat with a single wonder weapon. They defeated it with a comprehensive system of logistical countermeasures. They massively expanded their domestic shipbuilding capacity to physically outpace the rate of losses.
Just outbuilding the destruction.
Right. They requisitioned neutral shipping, they armed their merchant vessels, and most importantly, they instituted the convoy system.
But doesn't grouping all your vulnerable merchant ships together just create a massive, unmissable target for a hunting U-boat?
It seems counterintuitive, but the ocean is vast. By grouping ships together, you effectively empty the rest of the ocean.
Oh, I see.
A U-boat commander now has to find a single, albeit larger point on a massive grid. And that point is heavily defended by military escorts.
That makes total sense.
By the end of the conflict, they were even integrating the primitive beginnings of sonar technology and aerial patrols to spot submarines. It was a victory of cold, hard logistics over a localized tactical threat.
The logistics were absolutely staggering. And while the North Sea and the Atlantic campaigns dominate the historical narrative, the sources make it abundantly clear that this was a truly global chessboard.
A world war in every sense.
The scale of the intelligence operations alone is wild. Take the Magdeburg Incident in the Baltic Sea on August 26, 1914. A German light cruiser, the HMS Magdeburg, runs aground in heavy fog in the Gulf of Finland.
It's a totally random accident.
Right. And as Russian forces approach, the German crew attempts to scuttle the ship and destroy their sensitive materials. But Russian divers manage to navigate the wreck and recover the incredibly secret German naval codebook.
That recovery is one of the most consequential moments of the war.
They pass that codebook straight to the British, specifically to their Naval Intelligence Division known as Room 40. That single fog bank accident allowed Room 40 to decrypt German radio traffic,
giving the British Grand Fleet advance warning whenever the High Seas Fleet attempted a sortie.
It completely altered the tactical landscape of the North Sea.
Intelligence frequently acts as the invisible hand in these prolonged conflicts, and the geography of this war demanded complex intelligence and operational flexibility.
Definitely.
If you look at the Black Sea theater, you see a highly dynamic, almost isolated conflict between the Russian fleet, commanded by highly diligent officers like Admirals Eberhardt and Kolchak, and the Ottoman Empire.
Right. The Ottomans had acquired 2 advanced warships from the German Mediterranean fleet. The battlecruiser SMS Goeben and the light cruiser Breslau.
Commanded by a highly skilled German admiral, Wilhelm Souchon.
The Goeben was a massive problem for the Russians. It was a modern Dreadnought-era battlecruiser. It possessed the firepower to destroy any single pre-Dreadnought ship the Russians had, and the turbine speed to outrun their entire fleet if they attempted to corner it.
It dictated Russian strategy for years. The Russians were forced to deploy their entire Black Sea fleet as a single unified unit for almost every minor operation.
Just out of fear of that one ship.
Simply out of fear that a smaller detachment would be ambushed and annihilated by the Goeben. This high-stakes pursuit lasted for 2 years, with the Goeben gradually degrading its engines because the Ottomans lacked the facilities for a proper refit.
And the operational balance in the Black Sea only shifted when the Russians finally launched their own modern dreadnoughts, specifically the Imperatrice Maria,
which then mysteriously detonated while sitting in port in October 1916.
Yes. Just a year after it entered service, its forward magazine explodes, sinking the ship. The official investigations pointed to an accidental fire in the cordite handling room, but sabotage was never definitively ruled out.
It reads exactly like a geopolitical thriller.
It really does. And it wasn't just massive empires utilizing dreadnoughts. Smaller nations were executing brilliant asymmetrical strategies too. Look at the Romanian defense of the Danube Delta.
The Romanian Black Sea Fleet is a perfect study in local sea control without capital ships. They utilized an older protected cruiser, the Elisabetta, and a torpedo boat, the Smule, to effectively deny the Imperial German Navy access to critical waterways.
Just two small ships holding the line.
In late 1916, the Smule successfully engaged a German U-boat, the UB-42, damaging its periscope and forcing it to abort its mission.
And the Elisabetta even contributed to anti-aircraft defenses, shooting down German seaplanes over the port of Salina.
It proves that securing a critical local objective requires tactical ingenuity, not necessarily a dreadnought.
And the sheer geographical reach of these operations is mind-boggling. You have the German light cruiser SMS Emden conducting a massive raiding campaign across the Indian Ocean,
Culminating in the destruction of a vital British radio relay station in the remote Cocos Islands.
You have the German East Asia Squadron, commanded by Graf von Spee, engaging British forces at Cornell off the coast of Chile, and later being hunted down at the Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic.
Japan is actively seizing German colonial possessions in Micronesia and the port of Qingdao in China.
The logistical requirements to project naval power into those theaters were immense.
They were.
Perhaps the most absurd logistical feat in the sources is the Lake Tanganyika expedition. You have a British lieutenant commander named Geoffrey Spicer Simpson leading an operation to secure a massive, strategically vital lake in the middle of the African continent.
This story is incredible.
They literally drag two armed motorboats, absurdly named Mimi and Tutu, thousands of miles through the dense jungle of the Belgian Congo.
Just to launch a guerrilla naval campaign against German steamships on an inland lake.
It highlights just how comprehensively the concept of a world war was applied to naval strategy.
It forces a complete reevaluation of the conflict's map. The naval war was not confined to the blockade lines of the North Sea. It was actively contested on remote African lakes and isolated Pacific atolls.
So what does this all mean? When we step back from the specific ship designs, the decrypted codebooks, and the bizarre diet statistics, the overarching narrative is clear.
It comes into focus.
The naval component of this war was rarely about glorious, decisive ship-to-ship broadsides. It was fundamentally a war of industrial endurance.
It was a test of which nation could adapt its technology and logistics faster while wielding the slow, devastating, and invisible power of the economic blockade.
And that is the crucial takeaway for you listening today. Analyzing this era is not an exercise in memorizing ship classes or battle dates.
So it provides the essential context for understanding the roots of modern geopolitical tension.
Absolutely.
When we observe modern nations posturing over vital sea lanes in the Pacific, or racing to develop autonomous drone technology, or utilizing complex economic sanctions to strangle a rival economy, we are witnessing the direct, modern application of Fisher's strategic keys and the North Sea blockade.
The tactics evolve, but the strategy remains.
Exactly. It highlights the immense, persistent vulnerability of global trade routes and the unpredictable, often uncontrollable consequences of rapid military tech advancement.
Well said.
This raises an important question, though. Something subtly threaded throughout the final pages of the source material.
What's that?
We noted the brief mentions of primitive sonar systems, the very first rudimentary aircraft carriers being developed to launch planes at sea, and seaplanes actively bombing naval ports.
Yeah, early aviation.
The massive Dreadnought battleships were the ultimate, terrifying apex predators of the sea in 1914. They sparked a global arms race that consumed national economies and defined a generation.
Right.
But considering the lethal, asymmetrical efficiency of the U-boat and the birth of naval aviation during this exact same conflict, were the seeds of the mighty Dreadnought's complete extinction planted in the very same war it was built to dominate.
The ultimate apex predator, inadvertently funding the research for its own replacements. That is a brilliant framework to leave you with today. Thank you so much for joining us on this custom deep dive. We hope digging past the raw dates and tonnages gave you some incredible new perspectives on how the modern world was forged. Keep exploring the sources, keep challenging the established narratives, and stay insanely curious. We'll catch you next time.